Hello everyone, this is Aki the Great. Today we're going to be talking about just kind of like a method for understanding decision making in Legends of Runeterra. So this method is a little difficult to take to heart, but if you if you internalize these tips, you will find that not only are you winning more games, but you are always kind of cognizant of what's going on when you lose games. I found that that's often the hardest thing to do when you're improving, is to understand what actually contributes to losing a game of Legends of Runeterra. So this kind of three-step process is something you should always be thinking about in your Legends of Runeterra games. And before we get into it, I just want to say, if you're interested in Legends of Runeterra coaching, please check the description. There's going to be a link there to my coaching service. If you just want help building a deck, climbing ladder, or even learning the new expansion, I would be happy to help. So I put together a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation and just showing off each step, and then there's going to be at the end a Legends of Runeterra puzzle that I'll sort of walk through using this three-step method. So, in any given situation, the first thing you should be doing is identifying your lines of play. Now, this is a deceptively difficult step because very often you'll find that you just generally want to play a card and it's your instinct and you think that it's the only card available to you. But really push yourself to be thinking about other lines of play and think about future turns, think about the board state, think about your opponent's deck, think about your win condition, think about your opponent's win condition, and think about how your lines of play will stack up against everything that is going to happen throughout the match. In many instances, the thing that you just kind of want to do in the short term ends up being something that's slightly worse than the less intuitive line of play. So just make sure that first you're identifying everything that you can do in a given turn. And then the next thing you should do is think about which of your opponent's options counters each line of play. So this is kind of a difficult process because, very often, especially if you're playing something like a control deck, you can have lots of lines of play, and thinking about counters to each one is not easy. So, in general, you should just be roughly estimating which of your plays is countered by your opponent's most prevalent options. And then lastly, the way to determine which line of play you should do is through this kind of dual factor consideration. One, you want to figure out which line of play will yield you the most tempo or value, and you also want to be thinking about which of your opponent's counterplays are the least likely. So, with all that said, let's kind of see this stuff in action as we look at a kind of Legends of Runeterra puzzle. So, I put this together. This is not a screenshot from a game. This is just kind of an edited picture with kind of the values changed. You can, if you look really closely, you can see that things are not exactly where they should be. They're a little off, but it will serve us well for our purposes here. So, as you can see, we're up against Karma Ezreal, and we are playing a kind of tempo endure deck. I have some relevant information here, and you can see here Karma Ezreal is the deck that we're playing against. And let's start by doing the first step in the method, which is identifying our lines of play. So for this exercise, I will be writing down what I'm thinking about, but In game, you don't necessarily need to do this. This would be quite a tedious task, but the idea is to just kind of understand this method to the point where you can kind of internalize it and do the rough calculations you need to during the match. So we'll start by identifying our lines of play here. So you'll notice that we have the attack token. So as with almost all turns in Legends of Runeterra, where you have the attack token, the first consideration that must be made is, should we open attack? So let's think about that. So we'll just say lines of play, line of play 1. Line of play 1 is going to be open attack and threaten atrocity. So as you can see here, we have our Blighted Caretaker, and if we open attack, then our opponent will need to deal with it somehow, and then if our opponent deals with it somehow, we still have atrocity up to threaten lethal yet again. So that's our first line of play. Let's expand that a little bit. Our next line of play is to trigger the Nightfall on our Stygian Onlooker. So our second line of play uses Atrocity first on our Blighted Caretaker, so that we keep our attack token up and then can play Stygian Onlooker afterwards and trigger the Nightfall to give it Fearsome and +2 attack. So Atrocity first, then play Stygian into open attack. Or not an open attack, into an attack. So that's our second line of play. And our third line of play, I mean, we only have three elements to work with here. Our third line of play is going to be to play play Stygian, then attack while threatening atrocity. Let's just make sure that all the caps are in order. So we have our three lines of play here. You know, in this case, it's a little simple because we only have just a few elements, but of course in your game there could be any number of lines of play. Just make sure that you're looking out for them. So now we're on to the hard part. The hard part is which of our opponent's options counters each line of play. So let's make a new tab here, counters. So let's go back to our sort of puzzle here. Line of play 1. So what is line of play 1 countered by? Line of play 1, if you remember, is open attacking and then threatening atrocity afterwards. So how would we figure out what the opponent could do? So we have, of course, what our opponent has played, and we're going to reference this in a second. But I have on my Legends of Runeterra page a just kind of a mock Karma Ezreal deck. Now, you won't necessarily always have this at your disposal. Of course, you very often should try to have the deck list of the opponent's deck open, because it will help you understand what your opponent may be able to do. It will serve as a stand-in for your opponent's real deck, because of course your opponent's deck could have any number of deviations from a given net decked version. So this will serve our purpose as well. So what are we looking for here? So when we look at line of play 1, where we open attack and threaten atrocity, we're looking for 2 fast speed threats. So not only will our opponent need to have one fast speed threat to deal with the Blighted Caretaker in the open attack itself, but our opponent will also need to have a fast speed way to deal with the atrocity that comes afterwards. So, what things in this deck can actually do that? Well, there are a few. So Static Shock is one. As we can see in the infographic, 2 Static Shocks have already been used. Get Excited can serve that role. Mystic Shot can serve that role. Will of Ionia can serve that role. Deny can also serve that role in that the atrocity can be denied. Steel Tempest can serve that role because one Steel Tempest can stop the Blighted Caretaker, and Jury Rig. Jury Rig can stop the Blighted Caretaker as well. So I'm gonna basically put into this counters section a kind of almost like a regrouping of our play. So in line of play 1, we have Blighted Caretaker, lethal. Let's make this look good. And then we have Atrocity, lethal. So the reason I'm deviating it, I'm deviating these two elements of our play, or maybe rather delineating, is that different cards in our opponent's deck are going to be able to deal with these two different aspects of the lethal we are trying to get. So let's look at Blighted Caretaker lethal. Well, as we said earlier, Jury Rig can stop it. Mystic Shot can stop it. Steel Tempest can stop it. Get Excited can stop it. Static Shock can stop it. And Will of Ionia can stop it. So that's a lot of things, kind of. As we can see in here, 2 Static Shocks have been used, 1 Deny has been used. The reason I didn't put Concussive Poem on the list is that 3 Concussive Poems have been used. But that's about it for that specific part. So then there's Atrocity lethal. Jury Rig does not work. Mystic Shot still works. Steel Tempest no longer works. Get Excited does work. Static Shock also works. Will of Ionia also works. And Deny now also works. So this is so the way that we can sort of evaluate whether or not line of play 1 is likely to be countered is asking the question, how likely is it for our opponent to have one of these cards and one of these cards? So if our opponent had 2 Mystic Shots, they would be able to kill the Blighted Caretaker both on the attack and after the atrocity, or before the atrocity rather. Static Shock plus Mystic Shock works. Will of Ionia plus Mystic Shot works. Steel Tempest plus Deny works. There's a lot of different ways that the opponent would be able to deal with this. So this is just kind of an exercise in understanding how to think about what the opponent can do against your strategy. And as you can see, it's not easy. And you will not be doing this in most of your games, or really any of your games, because this is just kind of a tedious process. But it's rough math that you have to be able to do as you play. It's the toughest part of the game, but honestly, it's the most rewarding. So let's look at line of play 2. and do the same thing. So line of play 2, we play Atrocity first into the Nexus, and then we play Stygian Onlooker, and we go for the attack. So luckily we have Atrocity first, so we know that we can copy and paste this exact sort of rundown of the possible counterplay. But then we have Stygian Onlooker. So the Stygian Onlooker lethal is going to look a little different. It's going to look similar to the Blighted Caretaker, but with one notable exception. So we have essentially all of these minus Jury Rig. So keep in mind that Stygian Onlooker, once the Nightfall is triggered, Stygian Onlooker actually gets Fearsome. So if we, kind of look at these, it may seem like line of play 2 is a little better. But hold on, because these are not the only ways to deal with Stygian Onlooker. Because even though it's another, minion like Blighted Caretaker, we are actually playing Stygian Onlooker. And after the Atrocity, the opponent will also get an opportunity to do an action. So our opponent will actually get 2 actions before we get to attack if we go with line of play 2. It's a little hard to understand, but basically what it means is that our opponent will get the opportunity to counter us with slow speed things if we play our Stygian Onlooker. So let's continue. We now have more considerations. Thermogenic Beam can now stop our Stygian Onlooker. Now, in the deck that we have here, they are playing 3 Thermogenic Beams, but there's a chance that they are not playing 3 Thermogenic Beams, but it's a worthy consideration. Claws of the Dragon is another slow speed thing. Chump Wump is another slow speed thing. Of course, Ezreal wouldn't work, but Karma would work. That may be it. But you sort of get the idea. Oh, there's one more important one. Yone Windchaser. So we can already see, even if we consider those to be the only ways to deal with these 2 options, because there may be more, depending on what version of the deck is being used. That's a lot more than line of play 1. And even with the cards that have been played this game, we can still kind of understand that there are just more options to deal with line of play 2 than line of play 1. So were we to be in game and just kind of thinking about this on the fly, hopefully we would be able to recognize that we are introducing a whole new category of responses from our opponent by playing Stygian Onlooker at slow speed after the Atrocity, when our Blighted Caretaker would be dead anyway. So that's important to remember. But we still have one more line of play. Our next line of play is play Stygian Onlooker and then attack while threatening Atrocity. So now this is the difficult part. So now we have a lot of different threatening things on board and in our hand. So the first 2 lines of play only had each 2 different lethals to consider. But now our third line of play is going to have our third line of play is going to have 3. So we're going to have Blighted Caretaker, lethal. We're going to have Stygian Onlooker, lethal. And we're going to have Atrocity, lethal. So, the good thing is we can just copy and paste Atrocity, lethal onto this one as well. And keep in mind that because Atrocity plays a part in all of our lines of play, we can kind of consider it negligible that these would be ways of for our opponent to deal with it, because it doesn't really matter what we do at that point. No matter what line of play we're doing, we're playing Atrocity, so we don't even have to consider playing around these. We know we're going to play Atrocity this round. So let's look at Blighted Caretaker and Stygian Onlooker. So when we play Stygian Onlooker, the opponent is going to get a chance to do a slow speed thing. So that could be Thermogenic Beam, that could be Yone Wind Chaser, that could be Chump Wump, that could be Claws of the Dragon. So it could also be something like Karma. So essentially, we are in a similar position to where we were before, except that our opponent only gets one slow speed action. So if our opponent were to have Claws of the Dragon and Chump Wump, our opponent would only have the time to play one of them, because we are going to attack right after we play our Stygian Onlooker. So let's sort of do the breakdown, and the way that we'll account for that is just by putting the slow speed threats on one of our lethal trackers. So Yone Wind Chaser is going to be an exception to this, because Yone Wind Chaser actually works for both. Works to stop both Stygian Onlooker and Blighted Caretaker when he's placed down. So at that point, we would only have the Atrocity lethal anyway. So, but from now on, we'll just put Stygian Onlooker as the one that is stopped. Actually, Ezreal would also stop. Blighted Caretaker. So we'll put Ezreal here. Eye of the Dragon would also stop this. Claws of the Dragon. Chump Wump. And then Karma. Thermogenic Beam actually would not work if you look back here, because it would use up all of our opponent's mana, and at that point we would know that we could go in for the kill. So Thermogenic Beam is not going to be included here. And then we have essentially all of the fast speed things that would have been able to deal with our Blighted Caretaker the first time will also be copied into here. There we go. So that's a pretty long list. So let's continue. I think all of these things minus Jury Rig would also be able to deal with Stygian Onlooker. Now we realize that this is now a complete list. So we now have, for line of play 1, we have these 2 lethals that we're threatening, and these sets of potential counterplays from the opponent. Line of play 2, we also have 2 potential lethals with these two sets of counterplay options. And with line of 3, we have these 3 different lethals that we're threatening with this large list, but then this small list and this small list of potential counterplay options. So now, how do we choose between these 3 options? So, we've done a lot of work here, and I hope that you've been able to kind of follow along, but let me explain why we are able to decisively say which of these lines of play will have the least counterplay and have the most likely chance at lethal. So, in line of play 1, our opponent needs one of these and one of these. In line of play 2, our opponent needs one of these and one of these. But in line of play 3, our opponent needs one of these, and one of these. So given that our opponent needs just more specific cards to deal with line of play 3, it is the best option. It may seem a little unintuitive because open attacking feels so good in so many different situations. When you're ahead, especially when you have lethal like this, it feels so good to go in for lethal. But the thing to remember is that Karma Ezreal is a control deck with a lot of fast speed control tools. And as a result of that, developing into your attack will very often be a rewarded, line of thinking. So, hearkening back to our, 3-step process here, we were able to determine which line of play is best because, we had lethal. We were trying to threaten lethal with the least amount of counterplay. So tempo and value was kind of negligible because we had the threat of lethal, but our opponent's counterplays were basically the main things that we were thinking about. And as a result of thinking of those things, we found that our opponent needs the most number of specific cards to deal with the third line of play. So the correct answer to this puzzle is to play Stygian Onlooker, attack with everything, and then threaten lethal with Atrocity. This is a very long-winded way of saying you should be thinking about all your lines of play as you go through the turns of a game. You should be thinking about what your opponent can do at any given turn to make your moves less hard-hitting, and you need to be deciding what your best move is based on how much value you get in the game, how much tempo you're able to gain against your opponent, and which of your opponent's counterplays are less likely, depending on if your opponent has played cards before, if your opponent could have played a card before but didn't. These are the things that will make you a better Legends of Runeterra player and a better card game player in general. I hope that this was somewhat helpful. If you want the Karma Ezreal deck that I use to base this on, it'll be in the description. But once again, if you are interested in coaching, if you thought that this was somewhat helpful, or if you want more targeted help in a specific area, please let me know, because I would love to coach you, and good luck on the climb, everyone.